Have you ever heard the Piper Alpha disaster that claimed 167 lives? The Piper Alpha disaster, which occurred on July 6, 1988, was one of the deadliest industrial disasters in history, resulting in the loss of 167 lives. The tragedy unfolded on the Piper Alpha oil platform located in the North Sea, 120 miles northeast of Aberdeen, Scotland. Piper Alpha, an offshore oil and gas production platform, had been in operation since 1976. It was operated by Occidental Petroleum and was critical to supplying oil and gas from the North Sea to the UK and beyond. On that fateful night, a series of events set off a catastrophic chain reaction, leading to a massive fire, explosions, and the eventual destruction of the platform. The disaster began at around 10 p.m. when a gas leak occurred in one of the pump rooms. The leak was initially unnoticed, and by the time it was detected, it had spread rapidly through the platform. The leak had originated from a faulty valve, which had not been properly maintained. This valve had been identified as a potential issue during routine inspections, but had been neglected due to poor maintenance procedures. The gas from the leak entered the platform's ventilation system, creating a volatile environment. With the lack of a functioning gas detection system to alert the crew, the situation escalated and a small spark triggered the first fire. As the fire continued to grow in intensity, it began to compromise the platform's structural integrity. The flames reached the gas compression units, and around 10:15 p.m., a massive explosion tore through the platform. The explosion sent a fireball into the sky that could be seen from miles away. The initial explosion was followed by more explosions as the flames ignited other sections of the platform, including the oil processing units and storage tanks. Each explosion added to the chaos and confusion, and the workers on board had no choice but to attempt to flee. However, the fire was so intense that escape routes were blocked, and the platform's firefighting equipment failed to keep the fire in check. The fire rapidly spread, fueled by the leaking gas, which created a devastatingly dangerous situation. The platform, designed to process oil and gas, was filled with highly flammable materials, and the fire quickly spread to other parts of the platform. Flames began to lick at the structure, causing intense heat to radiate outward. The crew on board, which consisted of about 226 men, was caught off guard. As the fire spread, the platform's fire alarms were triggered. However, the firefighting systems were not equipped to handle such a large-scale disaster. Crew members began trying to extinguish the flames with the platform's firefighting equipment, but it was quickly apparent that their efforts were insufficient to control the blaze. The workers were not trained to deal with a disaster of this magnitude, and many were unaware of how to evacuate safely. As the fire spread, many crew members found themselves trapped in parts of the platform. The platform was not designed to withstand such a large-scale fire or gas leak, and its safety systems were inadequate. Some workers attempted to use the emergency evacuation system, which included lifeboats and escape routes, but the fire blocked most of these escape routes. The intense heat from the flames caused severe burns to many of the men attempting to flee, while others were killed outright by the explosions. As the fire continued to rage, the platform began to collapse, further trapping those still on board. Some workers were able to jump into the sea to escape the flames, but the cold water of the North Sea posed another danger. As the fire continued to ravage the platform, the crew members who had jumped into the sea struggled to stay afloat and fight off the effects of hypothermia. Others managed to make their way to the platform's lifeboats, but the boats were damaged in the explosions and fires, rendering them useless. The situation grew more desperate by the minute as the platform's structural integrity continued to deteriorate. At this point, the emergency response teams were notified, and rescue operations began. Helicopters were dispatched from nearby bases, and rescue ships were sent to the site. However, the situation on the platform made it nearly impossible for the rescue teams to reach the survivors. The smoke, heat, and flames from the fire made it difficult for the helicopters to approach. The fire's intensity made it impossible for rescuers to get close to the platform without risking their own lives. The helicopters faced immense difficulty in locating survivors in the thick smoke and haze. The smoke billowed into the sky, obscuring the view and making it hard for rescue teams to determine who was in danger and who had managed to escape. The difficulty of the situation was compounded by the fact that the survivors who had managed to jump into the sea were scattered over a wide area, making it difficult to locate them in the darkness. Rescue operations were hampered by the lack of communication between the platform and the rescue teams. The fire had destroyed much of the platform's communication equipment, leaving the rescuers with little information about the number of survivors or their locations. Many of the survivors in the sea were too weak to signal for help, and it was difficult to pinpoint their locations in the chaos. Despite these challenges, rescue teams managed to save 61 men, but most of them were badly injured, many suffering from burns, broken bones, and hypothermia. The helicopters were able to airlift some survivors to safety, but the conditions made it nearly impossible to execute a smooth rescue operation. The aftermath of the Piper Alpha disaster was devastating. Families lost loved ones, and the oil and gas industry was left reeling. The disaster prompted widespread criticism of Occidental Petroleum's safety practices and led to a government investigation. The Cullen Inquiry, which was conducted by Lord Cullen, revealed significant safety failures on the Piper Alpha platform. The investigation found that the platform's safety systems were inadequate and that critical maintenance was neglected. The investigation also found that the platform's fire suppression systems were ineffective and the evacuation procedures were insufficient. Furthermore, the inquiry revealed that the platform's personnel were not properly trained in emergency response procedures, which contributed to the high number of casualties. The Cullen Inquiry led to several important changes in the offshore oil and gas industry. One of the most significant outcomes was the introduction of the safety case regime, which required oil and gas companies to provide a detailed safety assessment for each of their facilities. The safety case required companies to assess the risks associated with their operations and to implement measures to mitigate those risks. The regime also required companies to provide evidence of their ability to respond to emergencies and to demonstrate that their personnel were properly trained. In the years following the disaster, offshore oil and gas companies made significant improvements to their safety procedures. Fire suppression systems were upgraded, and personnel were given better training in emergency response. Additionally, safety inspections became more rigorous, and maintenance procedures were improved to ensure that critical equipment was functioning properly. These changes were intended to prevent another disaster like Piper Alpha from occurring. Despite the reforms, the Piper Alpha disaster remains a powerful reminder of the dangers of offshore oil drilling. The lessons learned from the tragedy continue to shape the way offshore operations are conducted today. The disaster also highlighted the importance of risk management and safety culture in the oil and gas industry. The legacy of Piper Alpha serves as a cautionary tale, emphasizing the need for vigilance, proper maintenance, and preparedness in an industry where safety risks are inherent. In the years following the disaster, memorials were established to honor the victims of the Piper Alpha disaster. Families, survivors, and industry professionals came together to remember those who lost their lives. The event also prompted a wider discussion about the safety of offshore oil rigs and the responsibility of companies to protect their workers. While significant progress has been made in offshore safety since the Piper Alpha disaster, the loss of 167 lives remains a tragic milestone in the history of industrial accidents.